Well, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. I welcome you to this webinar. I'm Sara Wyant, the founder and president of Agri-Pulse Communications, and I'm very pleased to see so many of you interested in this topic today. Beyond cover crops and tillage, how can we really calculate farm carbon emissions? We're going to hear from our distinguished speakers with facilitated questions and answers. I'll make brief speaker introductions and encourage you to dig into their full biographies on our website. We also want to hear from you today. All of our attendees are welcome to ask questions, but feel free to offer those in the Q&A portion at the bottom of our screen, not the chat box. If you're experiencing any technical issues, please use the Q&A function to also let us know, and our team will assist you. In addition, we're going to be recording today's webinar, and it'll be available tomorrow on agri-pulse.com. So let's just jump right into the discussion today. Our first speaker is Bruce Knight. He's no stranger to many of you. Bruce Knight is the principal and founder at Strategic Conservation Solutions, where he's a nationally recognized expert on conservation, agriculture, and the environment. As a farmer, rancher, and former Natural Resources Conservation Service chief, he understands the workings of farm and conservation policy from the grassroots to the national level. Today, as a consultant focused on conservation and environmental issues related to agriculture, Knight provides a visionary and unique perspective on the future of conservation policies. And we're very grateful to have Bruce with us today. So I'll turn it over to you, Bruce.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. I appreciate very much the invitation to be here. If you could advance the slide, we'll move beyond the title slide. We're going to talk a little bit about a number of ecosystem markets. We're going to focus today mostly on what's called carbon markets, but there's also an interplay here with water quality, water quantity, wetlands, open space, and biodiversity. I mention these in passing, and go ahead and advance the slide. I mention these in passing because it helps to put this in context. The carbon emission markets, in many ways, I think over the last decade, we've made the very simple even more complex. And what I'm going to try to do in the next 10 slides, give you the basics on this and simplify it a little bit as we look at today's landscape and the following speakers. If you'd advance the slide, please. The carbon market opportunity for farmers, don't think of this as the sequestration, the destruction, or the avoidance of a molecule of carbon. Think of it as a systems approach. A systems approach that includes the total amount of carbon that's in the soil, in the air, in the biomass, as well as the nitrous oxide emissions released with fertilizer or manure management, as well as the methane released associated with decomposition from manure or waste molecules as they move at it. And we have to look at all of this. And so when folks talk about carbon markets or carbon opportunities, we're really talking about a more complex system and how do you keep that system's balance. If you could advance the slide. What are those assets? Well, they're all measured in carbon equivalents, but it's soil carbon, and most of the markets that folks are talking to you about today are around soil carbon. Nitrous oxide emissions avoided, that's really fertilizer efficiency. Biomass, either above or more importantly below ground from plant growth. Energy conservation, that's about emissions avoided. Enteric fermentation, this is what goes on in the gut of a cow, and the emissions avoided associated with that. And then waste and manure methane and the emissions avoided, or in the case of digesters, destroyed as they're moving through that. And so these are the assets that we look at, and then we try to quantify and measure. And that's why it's a little bit more than just cover crops and tillage, though cover crops and tillage, as our following speakers are going to talk about, are extraordinarily important. If you could advance the slide. What's key for the farmers and everybody that's looking at this play is that for the last 50 to 75 years, all the opportunities, the gains that have been made in the last 50 years, and they've been tremendous on carbon release and emissions, have been around efficiency gains. And I argue that even now, many of the opportunities where a farmer can recoup benefits today without getting involved in a carbon market is on the efficiency gains. And so that's soil health, it's nutrient management on the land, it's biotechnology and breeding advancements with livestock and with crops, it's biologics and integrated pest management, it's feed management, it's herd and flock management, better feet and legs, longevity, energy management, water management, and waste management. It is about how do small differences and small changes add up to be significant things that can be measured and in turn modeled, as the following speakers will talk about, in being able to measure and estimate carbon or carbon equivalents as we move forward. If you could advance the slide. So what's in scope? You're going to hear folks talk about scope 1, 2, and 3. Take Walmart as an example. What happens in the emissions associated with the store and the moving of their products is scope 1. The indirect costs associated with keeping that store open or keeping the execs in their C-suite offices, that's scope 2. And scope 3 are all the things that a farmer does that become a product that Walmart sells on the store. Those are scope 3. Now, when we have in the last 10 years talked about carbon markets and people have thought, well, Chevron's going to buy an offset credit, that is a scope 1 play. But now, as we hear Nestle buying product associated with carbon equivalents to offset their impact in the dairy case, that is scope 3. And so that's an important difference and an important concept as we look at these markets. They have a little different rules. One's a little more relaxed than the other. And the great opportunities seem to be emerging right now in livestock and crop production agriculture around scope 3 credits. If you could advance the slide. Next key term, and we're going to hear about this a lot today, measurement, reporting, and verification. Because with all of these aspects of these markets, where a Nestle or a ConAgra or someone is going to pay a farmer for changes in practices on their farm, they're going to want to measure it, they need to report it, and they need to verify it. Now, this is going to be a little more complex than number 2 yellow corn. It's not just test weight and a couple of quality parameters. That's where the challenge of what occurs on the farm, is this a change in practice or not, all come in, and that's summed up as MRV, or measurement, reporting, and verification. If you could advance the slide. The carbon markets, there are 6 thorny questions that come up, and we can do a presentation like this on each one of those 6. But the fundamental market that's key in carbon is the same that's out there for number 2 yellow corn. The integrity of the market, the agreement between the buyer and seller. The permanence, how long is it going to be out there? Additionality, is this a new change or not? And this really rankles with many farmers such as myself who've got decades into conservation, but an important one to aspect. Transparency, is this clear to an outside observer? How do you avoid double counting? Making sure that someone does not sell the same ecosystem service twice to 2 different players. And then what's the data? How do you gather it? How do you hold it? Who holds it? And how do you build it out? So if you could advance the slide. Who sets these rules? They're standard setting organizations. They're not set by the government today. These are entities that have evolved over the last several years around the NGO category. The one exception on this not aspect of the government is the California Air Resources Board, which has been setting the rules for the low carbon fuel standards. And I argue that that's a carbon market. But otherwise, you're going to hear folks talk about the gold standard, VERA, Climate Action Reserve, and then the Science Based Targets Initiative. These are multinational fora that have been establishing these rules. And the key thing that we'll have in the policy debate is, Should government be involved? How far should they be involved? What is the CFTC's role? What is the SEC's role, if any, in being able to establish these rules as we move forward? If you could advance the slide. The carbon trading platforms, there's a lot of folks knocking on the door. Most of these are carbon plays. You hear about Indigo, Bear Carbon, Corteva, Nutrien, ESMC, SIBO, the list goes on. Those are mostly carbon players. There's one out there that is emerging that's doing a livestock play. That's Atheon. And then the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund is selling and buying both carbon and water quality credits. And those are important distinctions. And of course, then there is the California Air Resources Board. Not really a platform, but that's where you get into the low carbon fuel standards and the associated things that are building open opportunities in diesel and ethanol markets that have been vitally important to many in the farming community as it pertains to carbon. If you could advance the slide. The contract parameters that you're going to see here, and we're going to talk about this morning. One, I used to be chief of NRCS. I thought my programs were complex and overwhelming. And I'll be darned if the carbon markets haven't made a government program look simple and easy to enforce by comparison of that. Timeframes, anywhere from 1 to 10 year. Measurement, in case of soil carbon, it may be both a pre and a post, a beginning of the contract and into the contract measurement. Modeling, every one of them is using some aspect of modeling to aggregate and create size. Additionality, they want to know that there is a change in place occurring as a result of that payment associated with that market. Permanence, how long is it going to last? What's the integrity of that lasting? Will it be undone by a subsequent management decision? Assurance that there's no double counting. Agreement about who pays what and to whom. The other thing is timing is everything because of the additionality crutch, that a change in practice is what folks are paying for in a carbon market, then timing is very important. So the conservation practice that a farmer is going to implement in 23, if you want to get paid for it in a carbon market, you're going to have to be selling that asset in 23. You can't hold back and wait until 25 or 26. In most cases, you're going to lose your additionality aspect. And then the last thing is data transparency. It's got to be clear to an independent outside observer that that good, reliable actions occurred, they were measured, they were modeled, and the program functioned. That's really the contract parameters that exist with that. You can advance the slide, but that's just to thank you for the chance to be here with you. And with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Sarah for our next speaker.
Thank you, Bruce. Wonderful presentation. We've already got some questions coming in the Q&A portion. So I'm glad you're going to stay with us and be around for some Q&A here as we move forward. Next, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is, again, someone who's very familiar to many of you. Gray Montgomery leads the corporate strategy for DTN, where he focuses on growth markets, mergers, and acquisitions. He has over 25 years of experience in innovation and business leadership roles, including overseeing DTN agricultural solutions that deliver award-winning agricultural news, markets, and weather insights to farmers and agribusinesses. Previously, he was president of the Farm Journal Data and Research Division and CEO of Pro Farmer. So please welcome Gray for his presentation.
Thank you so much, Sarah. All right. Okay. Everybody seeing that okay? All right. So I want to talk a little bit about how DTN is addressing some of these questions of sustainability that Bruce teed up so well. First of all, I mean, when we look at the current commodity grain model, we see a missed opportunity. Farmers aren't, yet getting the kinds of rewards we believe are possible for their sustainability practices, and obviously, some of those investments are big ones, big upfront costs. Grain buyers ultimately themselves operate on narrow margins and face some pockets of considerable risk. The end buyers, the food processors, the biofuels players, feed and fiber, all lack a means of traceability and even really good carbon accounting at scale. And consumers, who increasingly are signaling, wishes to kind of understand what it is that they're getting from their supply chain. Maybe want to buy a net zero product, cannot know how to do that. So we see an opportunity to change the status quo. The government, is stepped in by way of the Inflation Reduction Act and other things to offer, a series of incentives for change. And DTN, along with our partners at Farmers for Soil Health, USB, and others, are seeking to provide access to farmers and data and documentation on farmers' practices. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we're doing that. And then in doing so, then that sets up an opportunity where consumers, food processors, fiber, all those kind of end buyers can ultimately, if they know what they're getting, then they can justify paying some kind of sustainability premium. And finally, if there really is, a premium to be had out there, then farmers can make money, not just from, some of the grant programs that exist for upfront practice conversion, but, ultimately the premiums for, if there are premiums, then that can justify, continued commitments to the changes in practice. And so we're ultimately trying to facilitate a new model that, we see becomes a winning play for all four of the major entities in this equation. One, we want to see an opportunity where farmers can get better pricing and ultimately sustained elevated pricing instead of just relying on one-time grant programs. Elevators, the various grain buyers have an opportunity to get a cut of that premium too, which improves their margin. For all of the various entities that are ultimately buying from various particularly row crop farmers, we see an opportunity to help them substantiate their carbon accounting at scale. So whether that is for what they advertise to consumers, Scope 3 emissions reporting. The government's now going to be requiring that for publicly traded companies that you are able to quantify your Scope 3 emissions. Just general ESG reporting or tax credits. We offer a solution to help them be able to quantify that. And then finally, if all that's true, if we're able to show what our practices at individual farms and consumers can get good supply chain transparency. So what is DTN doing? We ultimately have two things that are two major motions that we're taking. One, we have a product called EcoField. And then secondly, we're working on a program in cooperation with USB and Farmers for Soil Health and a coalition of others to build a sustainability marketplace, which is a project that ultimately is getting funded by way of the Climate Smart Grant Program from the USDA. EcoField is ultimately just a data set on all farms across 34 states and 19 crops that provides for anybody needs to know basically roughly what where individual farms are operating at, what is their carbon sequestration level. And that includes not just the stuff that there's a lot of kind of programs that rely on remote sensing, but we also are able to provide a good estimation of some of the unseeable data, such as fertilizer practices. That helps a whole bunch of people. For like an agronomist, you can help ultimately target farmers to help them change their practices and really improve your role as the trusted advisor. For any of those downstream entities, this is kind of a starting point for being able to provide Scope 3 emissions reporting. And for people who are, ultimately, a number of entities that want to sort of help farmers make money from carbon credit programs, then it starts with knowing, who you need to target. Everything I talk about with EcoField then ultimately feeds as a sort of a starting point for a sustainability marketplace. And our big end game here is, as noted throughout every single one of these slides, the question of how to sort of serve each of those entities better, but it really starts with the farmer. And so we are seeing a world where if we can ultimately provide a view of how individual farmers are improving their practices, we see an opportunity for, and we're getting market response for ultimately being able to sell grain that has various sustainability traits, if you will. Does it, use a cover crop? Yes or no? What are the tillage practices? What are the irrigation practices? Ultimately selling those crops at a premium to end buyers. And then all those entities through that, chain, the farmer, as well as any of the people that are assisting the farmer, have an opportunity then to enjoy a benefit. But, the lion's share of that premium ultimately goes to the farmer themselves. All right. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. I really appreciate you joining us and sharing what's all the exciting things that you have happening at EcoFields. So stay tuned. Gray's going to be available along with Bruce, but we're going to hear from our next speaker, Dr. Ben West. He serves as Executive Director of Farmers for Soil Health, a collaboration between the National Corn Growers Association, the National Pork Board, and the United Soybean Board, which aims to advance the use of soil health practices in agriculture. With a background in natural resources, Ben has served in several roles, including as a professor, an extension specialist, an administrator, and project coordinator. So welcome, Ben. Glad you could join us.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thanks for everyone joining this. I've been working in conservation for 25 years. I spent my entire career in conservation, and if you're interested in conservation, then it's easy to see why it's such an exciting time right now. I mean, at a scale unprecedented so far, we're seeing all parts of the supply chain, from the farmer to the retailer and everything in between, federal government, state governments, nonprofits, really aligning and coming together to try and help advance conservation practices on U.S. farmland. And it's really exciting. Farmers for Soil Health is one of the big projects that's emerged from that. I want to take a few minutes and share with you about this initiative and this project, and talk about how it links to the things that Gray and Bruce have already talked about. So Farmers for Soil Health is started as a collaboration between the United Soybean Board, the National Corn Growers Association, and the National Pork Board. Obviously, corn and soy dominate U.S. row crop acreage, and pigs eat a lot of those commodities. So those three organizations together represent a massive footprint in agriculture in the United States. And they've all been working on sustainability stuff individually and somewhat together for a long time. But 2 or 3 years ago, they came together and said, if we really banded together and worked hard to collaborate more and better, we could have great impact in the sustainability space. So they signed an MOU and said basically that we're going to work together to try and advance sustainability and conservation on farmland. Shortly after that, USDA announced partnerships for climate smart commodity grant opportunities. With those three organizations, partnership and collaboration as a foundation, they went and recruited a lot of other partners like DTN, like the Soil Health Institute, like the Center for Regenerative Agriculture at University of Missouri, like the National Association of Conservation Districts, and others, and went after one of those grant funding opportunities. Ended up being awarded one of the 2 largest awards given, $95 million, to advance cover crops and a sustainability marketplace in 20 states. Now, when I talk about Farmers for Soil Health, there's really 2 things that I'm talking about. First of all is simply that collaboration between those 3 national commodity organizations. And that collaboration over time will pursue many different initiatives. Right now, the initiative that is dominant in everyone's mind, and the primary initiative of that collaboration, is this USDA Climate Smart Commodity Grant Program. So when I'm talking about Farmers for Soil Health today, I'm really going to be talking about the work and the mission and the objectives of that grant and that initiative, knowing that other things will be coming down the road, coming up down the road from that partnership. So this grant opportunity seeks to advance cover crops in 20 U.S. states, pretty much the Midwestern states, the kind of the northern Mid-South and the Mid-Atlantic states. And we're going to do that through three primary, what I call buckets of work or thrusts of what we're doing. The first is technical assistance. We know with 7 or 8% adoption of cover crops nationally in row crop farms that farmers still have a lot of questions. They're very more and more interested in cover crops, but they need help in agronomically deciding and determining if and how cover crops work in their operation. And in addition, they need help deciphering and thinking through all of the private market opportunities that may come from their decision to implement and incorporate cover crops into their operation. So technical assistance is a huge part of what we're going to be doing. We will have like boots on the ground, in-person, face-to-face technical assistance programs in each of our 20 states. One of the things that makes Farmers for Soil Health unique and powerful is that it is led by farmer-directed organizations. It's a program that was built by farmers for farmers. That's true at the national level with those 3 national organizations leading the program, but it's also true at the state level. When we decided how to roll out and develop technical assistance programs in each of our 20 states, we wanted to work through the commodity organizations in each of those states. So in each state, the corn and pork and soy state level commodity organizations decided how to roll out and what to do in their states with regard to technical assistance. We think that boots on the ground, local credibility, where farmers hearing from other farmers about the opportunities, we think is really important. So first bucket of work, technical assistance. Second bucket of work and budget is financial assistance. We'll be spending about $70 million out of the project to put dollars directly into farmers' pockets who try cover crops in their operations. Our program, when farmers enroll, our program asks them to enroll for a 3-year commitment, so 3 years of cover crops, and in exchange, we'll issue a payment of $50 spread over 3 years on a declining basis. So the first year, farmers will get $25, second year, $15, third year, $10. And the reason we did that is research shows that it takes 2 or 3 years of farmers trying out this new practice, cover crops, for it to really break even in their operation, because there's a learning curve, and we hope through our financial assistance to mitigate the risk of trying something new. Now, some farmers may be thinking, well, hold on a second, that's great, but there's other programs. For example, EQIP offers significantly higher payments for cover crops than we do, and we knew that. We know that one of the reasons farmers adopt cover crops and try them is for the payments, but there are other reasons that they do or don't as well. And we know one of the barriers to enter many of the other cover crop programs like EQIP is simply the complexity. So we pay a little less than other programs, but our program is much simpler. Enrollment is done 100% online. It takes 5 or 10 minutes. Enrollment's very fast. And our, Bruce was talking about MRV, the way we monitor and verify is done 100% remotely through satellite imagery. DTN manages that piece of the project for us. So for farmers, it's a very, very simple, low time investment program to enroll in and participate in. So first piece, technical assistance. Second piece, financial assistance. Third piece, Gray has talked some about already, and we'll talk about more, but that is we're going to be developing a sustainability marketplace. And we've already got the bones of the technological platform developed. And basically the purpose, the goal of that platform is to put farmers in more direct and transparent connection with end users. So farmers growing commodities with certain sustainability practices that lead to benefits like carbon sequestration, biodiversity, water quality, soil erosion, etc., can list those commodities on a platform. End users, whether those are food companies, biofuel companies, feed companies, looking to acquire commodities grown under certain practices and yielding certain environmental benefits, can talk to each other and make bids and deals in a direct, transparent kind of way. And we've still got some details of this to work out. As you might expect, it's a pretty complex system and idea. But one of the things that we're becoming more and more confident about as we talk to our corporate advisory groups and our farmer advisory groups is that everybody is enthusiastic about the basic idea of having more clear and transparent connection between farmers and end users. It puts both of them on a level playing field, and we think will be good for both ends of the supply chain. So I'll just end by saying enrollment in Farmers for Soil Health is open now. We actually opened it last fall. We've had a decent amount of enrollment already, but we expect this year, 2024, to be our big enrollment year. We're hoping over the next 5 years to get about 1.3 million acres enrolled and really kind of set the stage for farmers to be in the driver's seat, to be a leader in the sustainability space. In even bigger ways than they have in the past. So Sarah, thank you. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Ben. We've covered a lot of territory and I appreciate your presentation so much. I'd like to invite both Bruce and Gray to join us back on screen so we can start off with some Q&A. There's been several questions entered already. But I'm just going to kick off here. And Ben, have you there's been so much work that you've put into Farmers for Soil Health, and you expect 2024 to be your big year. How is everything going in terms of, you had a lot of paperwork at the front end with USDA and the grant making and everything. Can you give us a little insight about how much time has already gone in to get to where you are for this big launch that you started in the fall?
Yeah, there's been a ton of time and energy invested. This project is big and complex, and to tackle it, we have a ton of partners. I mentioned some of them, but that group has been, working full time for over a year now, really rolling this out. It is very complex. The back office is very complex, but our goal is for farmers for it to look very simple and easy, and I think we've accomplished that. It's not perfect yet. We'll continue to improve things like the enrollment platform and our MRV system and the sustainability marketplace when we roll it out. But again, I think that the fact that farmers are directing it, we think is a real game changer.
And Gray, kind of the same question to you, with your participation in the Climate Smart project and now the rollout of your platform. Tell us how many, what is the status now in terms of how many states do you have access to farmers in, and where you plan to go both with your expansion plans as we look to 2024 and beyond?
Yeah, so we're now working across 34 states. However, as far as our focus with the sustainability market program, we're going to be focusing that on just a few states at a time. That is a product that is ultimately in pilot, and we're seeking grain buyers for that. And so it's not when you're building a new product, it's usually not wise to try to tackle all 50 states at once. And so when we work with any number of buyers, we're sort of talking to them about like, okay, how about we focus in on this one particular draw area and test the program there. So I'd expect we'll be in the course of 2024 rolling out that program in 3 to 5 7 at most states.
Okay, well, thank you. Bruce, I remember when you were chief at NRCS and you were trying to get some changes implemented in the website and make it more farmer friendly, and just complex amount of data that was involved at that time, but now we're dealing with so much more with these carbon markets. How do you compare and contrast what you were seeing, even a couple decades ago with what the advent of all that we've got to view and measure now?
It's been an amazing process over the last 2 decades. And the incredible thing is the advancements of data provided by companies like it's DTN's analytical network, or what comes off of the guidance systems on the tractors that are running on my ranch. We can automate this in a way that we're going to be able to lighten that load tremendously if in the farm community we're comfortable with the transparency of how that data flows into the market and who's paying for that associated with these practices. These carbon markets, especially today, are not for every farmer or rancher. If you're concerned on transparency, if you're concerned on who's going to be walking across your land, this may not be the program for you. But if you're willing to try to seek value from what you're doing, and you can trust that satellite data, those sorts of things can provide those things, we've got a lot of opportunities going to be on the horizon. They're complex. It's more complex, many of these markets, than NRCS's programs are today. And the rewards, though, are every bit as great. And so there is a way to get compensation for that data investment as we move into the future.
Thanks. Ben, a question that's come in for you has been from Avery asking if you are eligible to receive payments as part of Farmers for Soil Health. Are you also eligible under other programs provided by, for example, a Bayer or an Indigo?
Yeah, great question. And it's a pretty simple answer. So Farmers for Soil Health, the financial incentive payments do come from USDA. So we're bound by their rules. And their rules simply say you can't stack a Farmers for Soil Health payment with another USDA funded payment. So could not stack it, for example, with an EQIP payment or one of the other Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodity grant payments. Having said that, though, so what that does mean is you can stack it with lots of other things. Many states have state-funded incentives for things like cover crops. And there are private programs out there that pay. As long as they're not funded by USDA dollars, our rules don't prohibit stacking. Their rules may, the rules of the other program may, but ours do not. So it's pretty simple. Just can't stack it with another USDA payment.
All right, thank you. Bruce, question for you from someone with a vested interest in hemp, Patrick Aktagi, wants to know, when you talk about small efficiencies, what about just switching to different crops like hemp?
My advice for Patrick with hemp, or anyone that's in a specialty crop community, is for the community to make investments in the research data, aggregating the carbon impacts, and then building those assumptions into the models if they want to be included in these emerging carbon markets. The focus last 5-10 years has been corn, soybeans, cotton, wheat, grain, sorghum, because that's where the acres are. The businesses, the national non-government organizations, the environmentalists are focused on the big crops because of the ability to go to scale. Anybody that's in a small or minor crop community, you'll need to invest in that, provide the science, build your case, and then come to the table and ask for somebody to include. You're probably going to need to talk to one of those standardization entities in order to be able to get a platform that will allow for conversion to your particular commodity. That's true whether you're talking about hemp or blueberries.
Thank you. We know we've heard a lot about that from the specialty crop community already. Gray, some questions for you. One is just about what's an example of fuel usage change that you would be measuring? Is it something as simple as you're using less fuel, or you're using different types of fuel? Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that we're seeking to ultimately track for farmers is ultimately the amount of fuels that they're using. Noted in the question, is that were you able to track ultimately for biofuel use? That's probably not something we're going to have in the first generation of what we're delivering, but ultimately it's just sort of a simpler, like how much you're ultimately using on your farm.
Thanks. Ben, I've got a question for you and potentially for Bruce as well. But you're all welcome to pitch in on this if you'd like. There's an anonymous question that came in. How do we ensure that the various levels of the supply chain are incentivized or being fully transparent so there aren't big winners or losers in this process? Ben, you've been very transparent about how payments are going to be made. But if we look at other parts of the supply chain and carbon credits, any thoughts on how we make sure that we're making sure there's apples to apples comparisons in terms of incentives?
Yeah, I mean, I do think part of that is simply transparency. As we talked about, this marketplace we're developing, we're trying to make that as transparent as possible so that farmers know who they're selling credits to and end buyers know who they're buying credits from. One of the things we've learned is that, farmers don't want to sell these sustainability credentials. In this case, we're talking about carbon just based on price. They also want to know who's buying it and what they're using it for. They want to contribute to they want to contribute to the sustainability of their industry more than other industries. So, building a platform that has transparency built into it from the beginning, we think is a good first step. But I'd love to hear Bruce's thoughts about that too.
I certainly see a day in which whether it's DTN or any of the other information providers could actually be having a role as it pertains to price transparency. 20 years ago, nobody was reporting on ethanol prices and ethanol markets. Now they got a whole page on it. I see a time in the future where you have a carbon market out there that you can track and see where those values are moving. I can see the same thing perhaps on a spot market on water or even on biodiversity. That may be 20 years away. It may be 20 months away, but those things are going to be key to dropping the transaction costs on these things. And eventually we've got to standardize these contract parameters because as long as they're one-off, it's going to be very expensive to implement. Now, the real question for us that we're going to be debating in this farm bill and afterwards is, does that standardization belong with the government or does it belong in the private sector? I myself am undecided on that as I've watched it, but there's a great opportunity out here to put more transparency using modern tools in place, and that'll help the price discovery on these emerging markets.
Well, and speaking of transparency, a question came in too for you, Gray, and just who will have access, it's transparency, but also on privacy, who will have access to both individual and aggregated data that you're going to be collecting?
Yeah, so first of all, there's kind of, I guess, a couple layers to that question. We provide modeling of ultimately what are, and in some cases, I think pretty accurate modeling, or I should say in a lot of cases, pretty accurate modeling on what happens at an individual farm level. And that's part of our farm market ID business. So, basically we have a business where we're providing, to various entities in the agribusiness world, who are the various corn growers in the United States and things like that. However, there's a degree, as Bruce notes, there's a degree of transparency that's ultimately demanded for, something like being able to sell grain that has XYZ traits to it to a buyer at a premium. And so as part of the marketplace, we'll be reaching out to farmers, and farmers will have the choice of being able to provide a bunch of information on their practices. Don't want to provide a bunch of information on your practices, and you probably won't be eligible for those programs. But if you do, then you're basically signaling to the world, yes, I'm interested in any number of end buyers ultimately reaching out to me and for the end of being able to, the farmer being rewarded a premium. So I think the way Bruce put it was, is this, this kind of world that we're coming into is going to demand like a lot of transparency, and that may not be for everybody, but that's a choice that ultimately, the farmer needs to take on. DTN's got is in this position. I think, one of the most important things about DTN is it sort of existed in the world as kind of this trusted entity to farmers. And we are coming into this big data world and see that there's like a lot of opportunity for farmers in that. A tricky thing that we have to negotiate, and we're really ultimately building for in all of our technology, is to make that data share as controllable as possible for the farmers. But at the end of hope, that the farmers should be able to make a premium, to be able to differentiate themselves in the marketplace by way of that data share.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question in about standards, back to the measurement thing. Bruce, I'll throw your way. Tim Kanzler wants to know what your thoughts are about the involvement of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which I assume would be like a baseline measurement entity.
Well, Tim, I'm pretty skeptical as to what NIST could add at this stage. When I've seen them involved thus far, it's tends to muck up the works as opposed to help the works. And this is going to be really important. Anytime you're talking about a government entity or quasi-government entity getting into this, as a rule, this external government standardization occurs as a result of market failure. And too much involvement at the beginning of these markets could actually prevent robust market development. That's how do you find that right balance? We got a pretty good private sector standardization of what is a carbon equivalent. Don't need NIST to necessarily do that, but are there other places for them to step in? We could take a look at that. Perhaps there is a role for some of those things, but I always want to make sure we have the right balance between the government intervention or standardization versus a heavier hand that could prevent these markets from really emerging and taking off. And right now, the government is not very far along as it pertains to this. There's a lot of work to be done on modeling and building assumptions for these models that to me very much belongs in the public domain. There's a lot of work to be done for the specialty crops that we just talked about to get the data together to be able to make it something that's scalable on specialty crops and each of those things. And then there should be some sideboards placed on things, and we need to have that discussion about where are those sideboards, which entities should be establishing those sideboards, where are they needed, and why are they needed as you're building these market opportunities out here.
Thank you. We had several different questions come in just about the tax implications of this, both in terms of tax credits, or we're talking about the 45Z coming up. Bruce, I assume that's maybe back in your bucket, but if Ben or Gray, you wanted to jump in there too. What do you see as additional revenue streams from implementing some of these practices and eventually getting tax credits as well?
It's why I've taken to adding the California Air Resources Board as a standardizing entity and as a market establisher on these things, because they're setting the precedent that's making the play for the low carbon fuel standards for things that are going into the carbon market. That is emerging now as, to a certain degree, the model that comes about as we're looking at the tax credits with either any of the 40 XYZ components that are out there. Right now, we've got in the last week or two starting to get some indications of what those parameters are going to be. I'm expecting over the next 12 to 18 months, further development of that back and forth between the agriculture community and the administration on what efforts fit in, what efforts don't. Right now, you've got renewable natural gas folks that thought they were going to be in the investment tax credit, they're excluded because the scrubbing equipment didn't fit. And so there's a quiet tussle going on that. You're going to have the same thing going on renewable diesel. You're going to have the same thing going on in each of these. And it's really going to play out over the next 12 to 24 months as we're going through that. And it's going to be very technical, and they're going to be very prescriptive on what's in, what's out.
That's part of why we launched a few years ago an office in Sacramento, so that we can provide coverage of all the things that are coming out of the California Air Resources Board that are, like many things in California, impacting the rest of agriculture.
Exactly right.
Ben, there's a lot of clarification questions that have come in just about how the payments are made through Farmers for Soil Health. Is it per acre or for 3 years and for the same practices? So maybe if you could drill down a little bit about, let's say that I want to sign up on my farm in Iowa, and how would I go about that, and how would I be paid then for that $50 payment?
Yeah, great. So let me start by saying we have one very significant partner I didn't mention earlier. They're kind of working in the background, but it'd be important for farmers to know because the check will come from them. So we are our partner, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, is the fiscal agent managing the money of the project. They're the ones that actually hold the contract with USDA, and they're the ones that'll be issuing payments to farmers. But when a farmer enrolls, you simply go to farmersforsoilhealth.com, all one word, farmersforsoilhealth.com. There'll be an enroll button at the top. When you click on that button, it'll take you to a page that leads you through some instructions and some background information. And then when they get ready to enroll, it will take them to the DTN platform, where they'll be able to enter their information, see all of their fields that's in their operation, and enroll field by field, or enroll pieces of field. So if a farmer plans on just planting a portion of a field in a cover crop, they'll be able to define that when they enroll. Once they enroll and agree to all the conditions of the program, then they are enrolled. We will, in January, February, March, with remote satellite imagery, verify that farmers did in fact establish a cover crop on a field. And if we verify remotely that they did, then we will issue payment per acre. So it is a per acre payment. Again, $50 per acre over 3 years, $25, $15, $10 per acre. Now, if a farmer enrolls and we are unable to verify through satellite imagery that they have a cover crop existing, then we'll reach out to the farmer and say, hey, what happened? You enrolled, we're not able to verify that you have living vegetation, a cover crop on your field. In some cases, maybe the farmer said, hey, I'm sorry I wasn't able to get it planted. We had really bad conditions in the fall or winter when I would have planted, was not able to plant it. In that case, we'll say, okay, no problem. Do you want to still participate? And we'll just roll your contract a year. So you'll still be in for 3 years, but it'll start the following year. In some cases, the farmer may say, well, actually I did plant it, but we had a really dry winter, for example, or fall, and I just didn't get any germination, had very poor germination. In those cases, as long as they can still, document to us that they actually planted the cover crop, then we will still issue payment. The payment is issued for a farmer planting the cover crop, not how good of a stand they got at the end. So that's how payment works. Pretty straightforward. Once farmers get into the enrollment platform, I think they'll see it's about as simple as we could make it.
It sounds pretty common sense there. One of the questions that came in, Gray, for you is about whether or not you look at the definition of sustainably grown. Mike Frank wants to know whether you believe that's going to be pretty broadly defined or have specific attributes in terms of you've got to check all these different boxes in terms of meeting a definition.
Yeah, well, so this is one of those things where it'll help, I suppose, in the near term if we're able to arrive at standards. United Soybean Board is actually has developed one such, the Sustainable Soy Standard, which is one of the, I think, primary starting points we're trying to market out to the world, because you can kind of imagine that there's two ways this could go down. And if you imagine a sustainability marketplace, you could have like a long pick list, and a buyer could come in and say, I want this, 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 and this, and we're could be prepared for that world. But it would be easier if we all kind of agree on consolidating the menu to a standard or two. And so this time that's what we're working towards. It is admittedly a new market, and so we're trying to figure out ultimately what end buyers need. The primary, we have to keep in mind a primary use case, which is that for a lot of these entities, which is going to be basically trying for them to be able to do their carbon accounting and be able to state what is in their supply chain. And so that could ultimately drive them ultimately demanding a few more choices than just a single standard. But we are going to market, and I think the easiest place to start from is one or two standards.
Sarah, could I add just one quick observation to it?
Sure.
One of the things that I have learned, and it's been really fascinating to me, we have a corporate advisory group made up of a lot of companies you would all recognize, CPG companies, retailers, biofuel companies, et cetera. As we've been talking with them for the past several months about what they need, one of the things I've learned is in the public eye, it seems like carbon is driving all of this, but the reality is a lot more nuanced. And the companies themselves, so if anybody tells you, oh, this is what it's going to be like in 3 to 5 years, they're lying to you, because the companies themselves are still trying to figure out and working through exactly what it is they need. And some of the companies, no doubt, are going to be looking for third-party verified carbon credits. Some companies right now are just saying, we don't know what we're going to want. We're interested in practices. We're interested in procuring soybeans from fields that were no-tilled and cover cropped, and we're not worried about the carbon accounting right now. All of the companies we've talked to are also interested in all the other, sustainability benefits like water quality and soil erosion and biodiversity. So the real world, the conversation happening behind the scenes is nuanced and complex. And I think everybody's still working together to try and figure out exactly what it looks like in future years.
Well, I think complex is one word we've heard throughout the conversation today. And I know that you've all been trying to make it as simple as possible. I'm just going to add one more question here as we wrap up, and then let you make any final comments that you'd like. One of the participants wants to know, is there a certain size, is there a minimum size to participate in some of these markets? In other words, what if you've only got 100 acres? I mean, is that still a candidate, or even smaller? Ben, could you talk about how that would apply to Farmers for Soil Health?
Yeah, our enrollment, if a farmer wants to enroll 1 acre, he or she can. Right now, our cap is 1,000 acres. So a pretty broad opportunity for farmers. One of our big objectives is to engage smaller and historically underserved, underrepresented farmers. So we really welcome farmers who are small farmers and think, well, I can't play in this space. I don't grow thousands of acres. I just grow a few hundred. Not only do we have a place for them, but we really want those farmers to engage with us.
Thank you. Just with the last couple minutes, Gray, if you'd like to share anything else about your efforts on EcoField?
No, look, it's I guess I'll just sort of part with this, which is that we get the question I guess I get a lot is this sustainability thing really going to happen? I think it's just sort of the skepticism, and I just observed that through our work with USB and Farmers for Soil Health, there's the end buyers are definitely very interested in the amounts of money that they're talking about wanting to apply to this are very meaningful. And so until all those checks start coming through the mail and landing in people's hands, then I understand the skepticism for it. But I think that between some of the reporting needs that ultimately companies are facing from the government, but also the demands that consumers are placing on grain buyers. It really does seem to me that this world is changing in a way that ultimately can be very beneficial to farmers, because it allows them the opportunity to really stand out and get paid for their practices.
Thank you. Bruce, last word for you. We got about 30 seconds.
Well, don't be afraid to dive in. The water's warm. There's opportunities abounding. But remember, these grant monies, these programs, free money's not free. It's going to be complex. It's going to be tough. And I'd encourage farmers to, if you're interested in these markets, play in more than one or two of the pilots, because they're not all going to be here 5 or 10 years from now. Chances are you are going to be here. And so I really encourage that diversity in approach with the farm community.
Well, thank you very much, Ben, Bruce, Gray. Thank you for this wonderful discussion. Sorry we couldn't get to quite all of the questions, but as I mentioned at the start, we will be providing a webinar recording on our website, agri-pulse.com. On tomorrow, it'll be posted, so you can look for all the slides and the full recording there tomorrow. You can see this QR code if you want to follow what we're doing in terms of talking to a lot of these experts about carbon markets and all the things that are evolving. So thank you for our participants. Thank you for our speakers. And thank you to our sponsor, DTN, for allowing us to bring this information to you. With that, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.